Hey, a thing happened over the weekend, and, social media is pretty insufferable right now, as is just everything will be for the next 4 or 5 months or so. But just a little nugget to help you keep this in perspective. From 1835 with Andrew Jackson up to 1981 with Ronald Reagan. It's about 150 years. The United States averaged either a president being shot or assassinated every 16 years, right? So it happened quite often. It has been 43 years since Ronald Reagan was shot in 1981. So we were kind of due for it. Enjoy the show.
This is a podcast.
Welcome to Our Weird World. I'm your host, John Hinton, and today we're talking about insurance. Are you covered for anything in the unlikely event that anything ever happens to you? You should be. You should be. Because when it does, you're going to be glad. You're going to be so glad that you have to call a claims department and talk to someone who doesn't care at all about what has just happened to you, but they got to get pictures and they got to get all kinds of proof, only to tell you that you have a deductible. You have an amount of money that you have to pay them on top of all the other money that you've been paying them for the last months and years in order to get them to pay for the rest of the damages and the stuff that happened to you. Maybe you had a tree fall on your house, or maybe you had your HVAC leak and the ceiling in your infant son's room collapsed. And then maybe, you had an HVAC company come out after you made the repairs, after you filed the claim, and they supposedly fixed it, but then they didn't, and the leak happens again, and the ceiling that you just got repaired collapses again. And so the insurance, they pay you some more money because you've already paid your deductible this time. And then they're going to tell you, hey, we're going to do something called, I don't know what it's called, retigation, something another. It starts with an R, I'm pretty sure. And it means that they'll go after somebody else's insurance company, which means the insurance company claims department is going to file a claim with another insurance's claims department so that they can get their money back that they'd already paid you. Because God forbid they don't have enough money because they keep paying for all of these endorsements for your Patrick Mahomeses and Travis Kelce's and Chris Paul's and James Harden's and Jake. Who cares about Jake from State Farm? No one. All right. No one cares about Flo, that stupid Gecko. Like, the fact that insurance companies advertise so much and then turn around and charge as much as they do for the premiums is criminal. Like, anyway, subrogation is the term. It doesn't start with an R. There's an R in it, but subrogation. And then they're going to find out, hey, the HVAC company, it wasn't their fault for not fixing the thing that they said was fixed, which makes no sense. It was the people who installed the HVAC 6 years ago, who isn't probably even in business anymore because it was just some guy named Carlos and his cousin who put an LLC together all willy-nilly, probably. I don't know. The thing is, insurance sucks. And I totally understand why people commit insurance fraud. All right. Because if you got to go through all this rigmarole to get help because they say they're there to help you, we care. We're like a good neighbor. No, you know what good neighbors do? They leave you alone and they don't take your money. And then they don't make you give them more money to then help you pay something off. No, that's not what a good neighbor does. Screw you. All right. I've been through some insurance stuff lately. Can you tell? It's just because here's the thing, when you get that money, you really want to get more. You want to get as much money as you can because these insurance companies, they're making millions and millions in profits. And geez, that's not right. That's not right. Don't even get me started on health insurance. Blech, it's gross. Today, we're going to talk about these people who went above and beyond when it came to insurance fraud. We've talked about some women in the past who have done this where they will have a husband and then they'll take a life insurance policy out on them and then they'll kill them almost immediately, which is dumb. The one that comes to mind is, what's her face? The giant Norwegian pig-toting lady, Belle Gunness, who she specifically, she had an old life insurance policy and a new life insurance policy. And there was one day where both policies were active. And then she killed her husband on that, or her husband mysteriously died on that special day. So she doubled up and got 2 life insurance payouts. And so a bunch of women have done this throughout history. Some men have probably done it too, but this was how women killed. Because women are not motivated to kill through like sexual deviancy or for power like men are. They need to have some skin in the game. They need to be rewarded for that kill. And what better way than to reward yourself financially after killing your husband? It's great. That's why I have more life insurance on me than I do on my wife. Because if she's going to kill me, she's going to earn it. All right. She's, I'll give her credit. So whatever. If if I die, it's probably not her. I don't really think that. Anyway, 3 stories today. Audrey Marie Hilley, Jerry Michael Williams, and our first story will be of Vernon, Florida.
Story time. Story time. Story time? Story time.
So we're not starting with just a single person. We are starting with an entire town. And that is the small town of Vernon, Florida, which is North Florida. I think it's a little bit west of Tallahassee. And Vernon carries the nickname of Nub City because there was a period during the 1950s and 1960s when this town of fewer than 800 people accounted for 2/3 of all insurance claims, not just in the state of Florida, but in the entire country, like some weird version of The Happening. Like this small town, 2/3 of all insurance claims for the better part of a decade. And at first, no one really knows why. No one knows why people just started doing this. But all of a sudden, people just began making insurance claims for injuries that had no business ever happening. All right. Dozens of claims, not on broken bones, not on, damaged homes or totaled cars, but severed limbs. Dozens of these claims for severed limbs were awarded checks for thousands of dollars. And look, thousands of dollars in the 1950s and 60s, that's good money. All right. And North Florida, especially kind of going over into that panhandle area, if you're not living on the beach, if you're living in some of these like podunk North Florida towns, it's pretty impoverished over there. You don't really think about it because like you only think about the nicer touristy parts of Florida, but there's some pretty bad parts of Florida. By the end of this ordeal, a popular insurance agent in the nearby town of Chipley had policyholders of his own that included a man who sawed off his left hand at work, another man who shot off his foot while protecting his chickens, quote unquote, another man who shot off his foot while squirrel hunting, a man who shot off his hand after attempting to shoot a hawk, which you can't do that. All right. Like, how are you shooting a hawk? But also, unless you just don't know how guns work and you're like, you got your trigger hand, towards you. And then you just got your other hand that's like supposed to steady the gun, just holding it over the barrel. It's just, like, Floridians are notoriously stupid. Not that stupid. All right. He had another guy who lost 2 limbs in what could only be assumed was a gunfight with his tractor. Another man who was just clearly begging to be charged with blatant insurance fraud took out policies with almost 40 different insurance companies, resulting in him paying premiums that were higher than his monthly income. And then one afternoon, he took his wife's car out for a drive, which had an automatic transmission, and he wrecked it. And then at some point during this accident, he just lost his left foot. All right. It's just gone. Had he been driving his own car, which had a manual transmission, he would have needed that foot to use the clutch. And to be even more suspicious, dude already brought a tourniquet with him that he insisted he only had in the case of a snake bite, and not because he had planned on crashing his car and then amputating his own foot at the crash site, which is basically what he did. And here's the thing. In the end, he went to trial for this because to have 40 different insurance policies, which is the fact that there's 40 different insurance companies out there is wild. And I get it. Capitalism, competition drives prices down. Does it though? Doesn't seem like it. Seems like they're all in cahoots with each other. He had 40 different policies. He goes to trial for this. He was found innocent of committing insurance fraud because no jury could really believe that someone would actually amputate their own limbs for monetary gain, even in Florida, as corrupt and silly as those people are. Yet somehow, nearly 50 people in Vernon did that in some form. 50 people chopped off a foot or a hand or just a whole arm or a whole leg to get an insurance payout, and then probably subsequently disability after that. They all did it. At least 50 people. Not a single one of them was convicted of fraud. And the only reason that this phenomenon ended in Vernon was because insurance companies literally just refused to sell any kind of insurance to people living in that town. So I drove through Vernon, Florida, several years ago while I was writing my book, Where the Weird Things Are. And I didn't see anybody with any nubs, which was kind of a bummer, but also that was like almost 60 years after the fact. So like, they're probably all dead. But God, man, just a wild story, but also Florida. Moving on here to Audrey Marie Frazier, who was born on June 4th, 1933 near Anniston, Alabama. By all accounts, she had a normal and happy life. And after marrying Frank Hilley in 1951 and having 2 kids, things seemed to be going really well. However, despite them both having jobs, which was pretty rare in the 60s and 70s, they never actually seemed to have enough money, mainly because Audrey kept spending all of it. In 1975, Frank came home to find Audrey in bed with her boss, which she had been doing for years as a way to supplement her income. But not wanting to file for divorce, Frank asked a minister in Atlanta for advice. He also, at this time, went to his doctor to address the chronic stomach pain and nausea that he had been feeling. And when the symptoms didn't go away, he was admitted to the hospital and diagnosed with hepatitis and died a few days later. Now, you know that this is all about insurance fraud. You already know what happened. You already know. clearly, Audrey, she's freaking out about money. She's having an affair with her boss who is paying her extra to get all up in them guts. And then they've probably been talking and it's like, man, you know what would help your financial situation out even more and make us both happy is if you had life insurance on your husband and then you killed him and you got all that money and then we could just go get married ourselves. Everything's great. So Audrey permitted an autopsy, which showed all the surface level signs of hepatitis, right? And figuring that was good enough, doctors signed off on the report. Why bother investigating any further? Audrey then went out and claimed a secret life insurance policy that she had been keeping on Frank for over $30,000. Well, 3 years later, Audrey then took out another life insurance policy on her daughter, Carol, which carried a $25,000 accidental death rider. Well, guess what? Carol soon began having the same stomach issues that her father had. This time, however, Audrey gave Carol an injection that she claimed would make things better. But guess what? It wasn't. It just made things worse. After visiting several doctors who could not find anything wrong and getting 2 more secret injections from Audrey, Carol was admitted to the University of Alabama Hospital, where doctors immediately realized that Carol seemed to have been poisoned. Shocking, right? You knew this. Even more, Audrey was arrested for passing off bad checks to the health insurance company, which then caused that policy to lapse. Back at the hospital, doctors ran tests that revealed Carol's arsenic levels were over 100 times what was considered safe. And when the authorities found that out, they ordered an exhumation of Frank's body, which also revealed similar arsenic levels. On October 9th, Audrey was charged with attempted murder and had a vial of arsenic confiscated from her purse. She was released on bail a month later, checked into a motel under a fake name, and then disappeared. Although she left a note claiming that she was kidnapped, authorities did not believe that for a second and listed her as a fugitive. Well, on November 19th, Audrey's aunt's home was broken into with another note reading, "Do not call police. We will burn you out if you do. We found what we wanted and will not bother you again." Well, on January 11th, 1980, investigators found traces of arsenic in Audrey's mother and mother-in-law, along with a woman named Sonia Gibson, who died at the age of 11 after falling ill during a visit to Audrey's house to play with Carol. Despite this extra evidence to suggest that Audrey was totally poisoning people, police had no idea where she was. They couldn't go arrest her. She had disappeared. Well, on May 29th, 1981, Audrey, now under the name Robbie Hannon, married a guy named John Greenleaf Homan III, took his last name, and then moved to New Hampshire. A year later, Audrey told John that she needed to go back to Florida and Texas to tend to some family business regarding her fake sister, Terry. She didn't have a sister named Terry. Well, on the way down to Florida, Audrey called John, disguising her voice and claiming to be Terry, and told him that Audrey had died in Texas. And she also said that there was no need for him to come down because her body had already been donated to science. How stupid is this woman? Where it's just like, honey, I've got to go down to Texas to do some family business with my sister, Terry. Terry, I didn't know you had a sister. Yeah, she's a long lost sister. I never mentioned her until now because we really had never had contact and I just wanted to live my life with you. Anyway, I'll be gone for a few days. Be back soon. Love you. And then just, a few days later, calls John. Hello. Oh, my wife, whatever your name is now, Robbie. So good to hear from you. No, this isn't Robbie. This is Robbie's sister, Terry. And I just want you to know Terry's dead. And don't worry about coming down for the funeral. We done donated her body to science. It's just like, oh God, for someone to think that would work is pretty stupid, right? But she's gotten away with all of this. She's murdered so many people so far with arsenic. She thinks she can get away with anything. Well, a few months later, here's what's crazy. A few months later, after losing weight and dyeing her hair, Audrey returned to John in New Hampshire, posing as Terry, and tried to live as John's new wife. So John, he's decimated, right? He thinks his wife has died. He couldn't even go down there to attend her funeral. And then a few months later, this woman who's thinner, different hair color, but looks like his wife shows up And he's like, howdy, I'm Terry. I'm Terry. I'm your dead wife's sister. I'm just going to be your wife now. That's how we do it in Texas. And like, and if I'm John, I'm like, what? This just, and how do you, but he goes along with it, I guess. However, police got a little suspicious when they were unable to verify the information John gave them when he wrote up Robbie's obituary. Police brought in Audrey, Terry, Robbie, whatever her name is, for questioning, and she quickly cracked and she confessed her true identity. Audrey was put on trial in Alabama and was quickly found guilty of murdering her husband and trying to kill her daughter. In 1987, after being awarded a 3-day pass for good behavior, Audrey disappeared again. Shocking. Why would she not go back to prison? Police did find her 4 days later, soaking wet and freezing after she got lost in the woods. And as police transported her to the local hospital, Audrey suffered a heart attack and died. So, got what she deserved. Our final story here is of Jerry Michael Williams, who was born on October 16th, 1969 in Bradfordville, Florida, which is a suburb of Tallahassee. His parents worked hard enough to save enough. Let's try that again. His parents worked hard to save up enough money so that instead of buying a house, they could send their boys to North Florida Christian High School. Jerry was quite successful at this private school. He served as student council president. He was a member of the Key Club. And then after high school, he attended Florida State University. He majored in political science and urban planning. He got a job as a property appraiser and began building this reputation as a hard worker. He then married his high school sweetheart, Denise Merrill, in 1994 and had a daughter with her 5 years later in 1999. By 2000, Jerry was making over $200,000 a year. And after his father's death, shortly after that, which left him very distraught and heartbroken, he took out a $1 million life insurance policy on himself, just in case, because, you know, his family, they worked really hard. They sacrificed. They didn't have a ton of money because they used it all to put their kids through private school, probably help pay for their college. And so Jerry was probably left with dealing with a lot of the estate, or probably not much of the estate, honestly. So he's really impacted by this. He takes out a $1 million life insurance policy on himself and then told his wife about it, which I don't know. I mean, I would, because I trust my wife, and maybe he trusted his wife. Who knows? But it just seems like a lot to take out on yourself. But when you're making $200,000 a year, you can do that. On December 16th, 2000, Jerry woke up early, hooked up his boat, and drove out to Lake Seminole to do some duck hunting. But when Jerry wasn't home by noon like he promised, Denise got Jerry's life insurance agent and close family friend to drive out to the lake and begin looking in the usual places that Jerry hunted. They soon found his Ford Bronco and notified the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, because apparently that's who you notify instead of, the police. However, the search for Jerry was called off later that day after a storm popped up on the lake. When the search resumed the next day, a helicopter spotted Jerry's boat 225 feet from the ramp. When rescuers reached the boat, they found Jerry's shotgun still in its case. And then because the boat was found in a cove that used to be an orchard before the lake was created, leaving a lot of tree stumps at the bottom of the shallow lake, authorities assumed Jerry had hit a stump with his boat, fallen out of the boat, and drowned. With that working theory, rescuers assured the family that Jerry would pop back up in no more than a week. After 2 months and still no body, rescuers called off the search. Investigators closed the case, believing alligators had found the body, dismembered it, and carried it off, never to be found. In June, a fisherman found a pair of waders floating in the lake. Divers were called in to search the area and found a hunting jacket with Jerry's hunting license inside. None of these items appeared damaged, and none of the items, strangely, showed signs that they had been in the water for several months. So that's a little suspicious. A week later, Denise's petition to have Mike declared legally dead was granted, and she immediately went out to collect on that life insurance, for which she received $1.5 million. 5 years later, Denise married a man named Brian Winchester, that same life insurance agent who had originally written Jerry's policy, who was a close friend, who had gone out and initially tried to find him. You get it, right? Meanwhile, Jerry's mother, Cheryl, was not convinced that Jerry was actually dead and urged authorities to continue their search. She's delusional. He's dead. In 2004, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, that's a weird way to, Nah, that makes sense. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement agreed to reopen this case. The officers working the case agreed that the disappearance was unusual, such as the fact that he used an unfinished mud patch as his boat launch when there were concrete boat launches nearby that were perfectly usable that he had probably used before. Also, the winds from the night before should have pushed his boat to the Georgia side of the lake, but didn't. And the gas tank for the boat was still completely full when they found it, meaning it's not like he had been driving around the lake all day. When they learned that Jerry never hunted alone, but he had done so on this particular day, now they're like, all right, this is definitely not right. All right. Even more, investigators then realized that alligators in the lake couldn't possibly have eaten Jerry because the lake was partially iced over at that point in December, and alligators don't feed when it's that cold. So despite being pretty convinced that alligators had nothing to do with it and that, he probably just drowned, investigators were forced to close the case again because just of an overall lack of evidence. Yes, so many things pointed to him getting murdered, but they didn't have any proof. And so he probably just fell over, hit a stump, and drowned. Well, because the original investigators were so certain that he had just drowned in the lake, all of the evidence that they had collected up to that point had either been destroyed or tampered with to the point that it was unusable. So Denise, she thinks she's getting away with this 100%. Well, in 2012, Jerry's mother, Cheryl, wrote a letter every single day to Governor Rick Scott pleading with him to assign a different agency to the case, which by now had been opened and shut on 3 different occasions. After 200 letters with no response, she learned that the governor's office had been forwarding these unopened letters to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, which was the exact agency she didn't want working on the case. And when the FDLE opened these letters, they just tossed them in the case file without even looking at them. Like, they didn't even open the letters. They just saw, oh, here's another letter from Cheryl. We'll just throw this in Jerry's case file. And didn't even open them. Classic Florida. Later that year, in 2012, Denise and Winchester ended up separating, citing Winchester's sex addiction as the problem. The two got divorced in 2015, and Winchester was ordered to provide an appraisal of the couple's house by 2016. On August 5th, the day that the appraisal was due, Denise was on her way to her job at Florida State University when Brian jumped out from the back seat of the car, pointed a gun at her, and forced her to drive to a specific location. This dude is nuts. That's a movie scene in real life. Dude just hiding in the back of his now divorced ex-wife's car and then jumps out while she's driving to work unknowingly. And then he's just pointing a gun at her. All right, we're going to drive somewhere. So instead of going where Winchester told her to go, she pulled into a CVS parking lot where everyone could see what was going on. Winchester told Denise that he was about to kill himself and that he had no intention of harming her. Denise eventually calmed down because she's probably freaking out, right? Not just from being jump scared out of nowhere, but also having a gun pointed at her. And after promising not to tell the police, drove Winchester back to where he had parked his car. After dropping him off, she then lied. Of course, she immediately went to police. Well, Brian Winchester was arrested for kidnapping, domestic assault, and armed burglary later that day. He was eventually sentenced to 20 years in prison plus 15 years of probation. The next day, after his sentencing, State Attorney Jack Campbell announced that Jerry's body had been found and that, oh my gosh, you guys, Jerry had been murdered. What a surprise! What we knew this entire time. Although Campbell didn't reveal any additional information about who he thought was behind the murder, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement came out and said that Jerry's body had been found at the end of a dead-end road 5 miles from his childhood home. They had initially received a tip alerting them that his body was in a nearby lake and spent 5 days digging 9-foot holes in the mud while eels and water moccasins slithered all around them because, Florida. They eventually found his body buried beneath piles of dirt that were then stacked on pieces of plywood. Well, finally, as you have been waiting for this whole time, Denise was arrested on May 8th, 2018 and charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy, and accessory after the fact. Not surprisingly, you knew all of this, right? Denise had conspired with Brian Winchester to murder Jerry for the insurance money, and Winchester had actually been the one to murder Jerry. Even more, Winchester revealed that he and Denise had been having an affair with each other since 1997 after having been in a high school relationship together. As this affair progressed, Denise and Brian, who was also married at the time, began making plans to rid themselves of each of their spouses so that they could be together. Denise initially floated the idea of staging a boating accident on the Gulf of Mexico where Jerry and Winchester's wife would both die. This woman is nuts. However, Winchester had like enough of a heart. He was enough of a good guy that he didn't want his children to lose their mother. Unlike this cold, heartless wench who is fine letting their kid be without their dad. Denise then suggested they just murder Jerry in his office and stage it to look like a robbery. Winchester thought that was a dumb idea and suggested that they stage a hunting accident. So on the morning of Jerry's disappearance, Winchester had actually met him at the lake, and once Jerry had his waders on, just pushed him into the water, thinking that he would drown once the waders filled with water. However, Jerry landed on a stump and he resurfaced, so Winchester shot him in the face with his shotgun. Denise was also sentenced to life in prison for her participation in all of this. There you go. Insurance fraud in the books. Fun stories. Like, it's fun just watching. I mean, fun may not be the right word, but like, it's just interesting watching these stories unravel. Cause like, you know what happened, but like, maybe you don't know exactly how, or maybe you want to know how they ended up screwing up and getting caught. And so it's just fun in that regard. But let's recap today and see what we learned.
What did we learn?
Number one, the town of Vernon, Florida, even though it had less than 800 people, accounted for 2/3 of all injury insurance claims in the 1950s and 60s in the entire country. And people were just purposely hacking off limbs to get insurance checks. It was wild. Number two, Audrey Marie Hilley. She killed her husband and tried to kill her own daughter. Also tried to kill, I think, her mother and maybe her mother-in-law. Crazy. But then, like, goes on this whole tirade where, like, she changes her name, moves to New Hampshire, marries this other dude, fakes her own death after escaping from prison. All of that was while she was escaping. I don't think I emphasized that enough, right? Like, the part where she has already married John Holman, moved to New Hampshire, that is where she has escaped from prison. All right? She's changed her identity. And then fakes her own death to get out of that marriage, loses weight, dyes her hair, goes back to that dude, playing the part of her fake dead sister, and tries to live. Anyway, she gets caught. She murdered a lot of people. You get it. And then number three, listen, ladies, if your husband tells you that he got a life insurance policy and named you the beneficiary, and it's for like hundreds of thousands or $1 million, don't kill him. Like, that's rude. All right. I get why you would want to do it, but don't do that. That's rude. All right. Just get alimony for like 18 years. It's almost, it'll add up to basically the same amount. So yeah, that's it. Thanks so much. Next week, I forget that, like, that's how I'm doing it now. I'm not going to play the music again. I'm just going to wrap up the show. So next week, we are getting back into serial killer world. We've got a 2-part series coming up with just an assortment of American serial killers. Next week, we are looking at the stories of the Harp brothers, Philip Jablonski, and Juan Corona. So come on back for that. I feel like it's been a while since we've done some serial killers. So, I mean, technically, I guess Audrey Marie Hilley was a serial killer. You get it. You know. Anyway, that's it. Thanks so much for continuing to listen. Keep telling all your friends and keep it weird.
This is a podcast